And it takes us back to a tragic story we brought you on BBC Surrey last week. 3.5 years ago, Carissa Cox and Richard Carter from Guildford took their baby to hospital. They then had their child taken away from them and later adopted after hospital staff noticed bruising and other marks.
But they have always maintained their innocence, arguing that injuries were consistent with rickets disease, and last week at Guildford Crown Court they had the child abuse charges against them dropped. They then told BBC Surrey they'd fight to get their baby back.
From what has happened throughout these 3.5 years, it's just been hell. Just been dragged through mud by the social services, how we've been treated like animals, how they just constantly look down their noses at you. Because we were young parents first time, I believe. That's my view of it anyway.
So do you think if you were older, maybe lived in a different area, maybe more affluent, you might have been treated differently?
Yeah, I do believe that quite strongly. In my mind, I'm not speaking for anyone else, it's just purely on how I see it.
So if you had the chance to speak to the head of social services, what would you say?
I'd say you need to treat people more fairly, more equal, as if everyone's just normal people, not different races, not different backgrounds, nothing. Just everyone the way that they are.
So for you, the fight begins. Are you determined to get your child back?
Oh, I'm more than determined. It's my child, and I will go down fighting.
Well, legal experts said it's unlikely Carissa and Richard will get their child back, but this morning we can speak to somebody ready to support the parents' appeal to get the adoption reversed. John Hemming, who was a Lib Dem MP for 10 years. He's also chairman of the Justice for Families campaign group. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us about Justice for Families.
Well, the problem is that the government has set an objective, which is to increase the number of adoptions. Now, if obviously every time you have an adoption, you're destroying an original family. So the government has targets essentially for family destruction in the country. And more recently, in fact, just recently, in the last couple of days, I had a judgment from the Supreme Court which said it doesn't matter if the local authorities are biased towards adoption. You just have to live with it. And I don't think we should have to live with it. I think basically people should have a fair trial, and you should look at what's best for the child.
Well, we mentioned last week that in a weird way, it just seems like the cart has been put before the horse on this one.
Yeah, but the sad thing is that happens on many occasions. I had another Surrey case which involved a Slovak family where we did manage to succeed before the child was adopted, but after it was placed for adoption. In fact, it was two children. They're now living with the family in the Slovak Republic. So there was an adoption reversed, in fact, earlier this year because a child came to the court and said, I was abused by my adopted family. Can you please let me go back to my original birth family? And you obviously that raises questions as to why the courts are putting children with worse families than the original family they were with.
Well, you've previously gone on record saying that parents suspected of child abuse should leave the country rather than face justice.
Yeah, a lot of them do. That's because the system's biased against them. And as I said, you had this judgment from the Supreme Court, which basically said it doesn't matter that the local authorities are biased, you just have to live with it. And I don't think that's right, because basically if they fire social workers, as they did in Leicester, one social worker was fired in Leicester for wanting to reunite a family, it's not really a fair system. And there was another Surrey case, interestingly, of a lady who went to Zimbabwe to have a daughter, because had she come back to the UK with a daughter, should have been taken at birth. And there are about over 100 families living in Ireland, maybe 10 families in France. The French courts know how mad things are here, and so often will ignore court orders from England because it's just so silly. And it is a horribly awful situation.
Do you have any sympathy, though, for the social services? Because it's like, if they don't investigate enough and a case of abuse gets missed, then they get it in the neck again.
Well, obviously they need to investigate, but the problem is they shouldn't be biased towards one particular outcome. They should be looking at what's best for the child.
Well, arguably, they say that's their only concern.
Yes, but they're not, because the fact is that they have targets for adoptions, so it can't be their only concern. If they're saying we're trying to increase adoption numbers, it's the same children. So So, they may say all sorts of things. You can't trust a word they say sometimes. But the fact is that they have targets for adoptions. I haven't tried to find them for Surrey. I found them more recently for Merton. They are trying to increase adoption numbers. It's not a secret. You ask government ministers, are you trying to increase adoption numbers? They will say, yes, we are. And they just don't understand how the system works, so they've got the maths all wrong.
Now, bringing it back to Carissa and Richard, what advice would you give them?
Well, I want to see the case in some detail, to be honest, because obviously these things are complicated. I'm aware there were quite a few sort of rickets vitamin D deficiency cases. I know of about 10 that have gone through. And the problem is it's a corrupt system. It's a biased system. So it's a system where there is a bias. The bias is towards adoption. It is not secret. It is defined. It is government policy. It is local authority policy that there is a priority in getting children adopted. And you're fighting, therefore, a system that's not working properly. And so, in part, you have to fight to change the system as well.
Is it possible, you mentioned it is, to get an adoption reversed?
Well, it has happened. It's not very often. There was, I said, one earlier this year. We managed to appeal adoption also successfully and quash it earlier this year. But it's, the problem is the system still is wrong. And until the judiciary and the government accept that actually setting family destruction targets is not a good strategy, the system will continue going wrong.
John, good talking to you. Thank you. John Hemming, former Lib Dem MP for 10 years, chairman of